What's up, UFS community? This is Devin here, and I wanted to make this video today to show you guys why I think Shadow Man does not necessarily need to be playing flash attacks. To get right into it, Shadow Man is a character out of the new Platinum set. If you don't know what he does, or if you want to look up any of the cards, I'll leave a UFS Ultra link in the description of the video here. But what Shadow Man does is he says R once per turn. After you play flash attack, you can add another one other flash attack from your card pool to momentum. And he says R, discard one momentum. After an attack is played, your opponent destroys one foundation. If that foundation was cost 1 or less, this attack gets +3 damage. Important to note that can be your attack or your opponent's attack. And either attack will get the damage based on if your opponent destroys the correct foundation or not. So, to move right into that, when I looked at this character, I was pretty excited to try him out. I'll play anything that has death and destroys foundations on it. I was I had a pretty lukewarm reaction to the idea of having to play flash attacks, and I'm just like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll do it if I have to. But when I actually sat down to start building him, what I thought to myself was that if I'm going to play flash attacks just to generate momentum to power his other ability, for one thing, I don't think flash attacks in general don't really have great scaling into the mid and late game. Once your opponent starts having board presence and resources to commit to blocking, you can get locked out of the game really easily. So I don't like the idea of playing flash attacks if I don't have to, especially because he's not quick, man. He's not going to make them more difficult to deal with. He's got a delay on his staging area control with his flash attacks that Quick Man doesn't have. So I feel like his R to generate momentum is an ability that's really easily replicated just by playing foundations that can do the same thing. I mean, obviously he can't play motivation, which is like a direct copy of what his ability does. But if you're looking at cards like Repaying a Debt, or cards that just generate momentum for you, cards like Second Chance, Reactive Style, Strength of Tail, Delta Kick, you're going to find yourself very easily replacing that ability by just playing different attacks. So this is my take on just completely ignoring the ability to generate momentum with flash attacks, and I'm just going to play attacks to generate momentum anyways, through dealing damage, through creating pressure on your opponent, and just playing, in my opinion, a superior attack lineup. So to get right into the list, Cowboy Battery, Spiders and Dragons, Prepare to Fight. These are all cards that belong in every death deck until they're gone. These cards are far too strong to just leave in your binder. They should be played. They can really easily be slotted into pretty much any deck on those symbols, all three of those cards. Particularly Cowboy Battery just has extremely absurd numbers on it. A 3-check that deals 12 damage for 5 difficulty and has a block is not something that's very pleasant to play against. There's no reason to not play it. But going into the rest of the attack lineup, so what I went for here, and I didn't spread these out very well, but what I opted for was that, in my opinion, Shadow Man's, Flash doesn't even crack the top 3 in best keywords you could play in Shadow Man. The best keyword that I think Shadow Man can play is the throw keyword. Throw keyword is going to be an easy means for him to generate momentum, because he's going to be constantly dealing damage with his attacks. You're not going to see that momentum until the turn's over anyways, for the most part, even if you're playing the flash attacks. So the throws are going to generally go to your momentum at the same speed, aside from the one you might get off flash, which you can easily replace with a foundation anyways. And But the throws are going to deal damage with far more consistency than a flash attack will through all stages of the game. You're going to be able to keep pressure on your opponent at all times. Between destroying his foundations and constantly chipping him with throws, he's going to be kept on the back foot through most of the matchup if you, especially if you go first. But even if you go second, it's not really hard to crawl back into the game and crawl up to an advantage even. I love throws in Shadow Man. I also love reversals. Being able to generate momentum on your turn and then turn that into staging area control on your opponent's turn while he's trying to poke you back, generate advantage. You can hit him back with reversals so that you don't even risk him getting the +3 damage on his own attacks. You can throw it on your own attacks instead if he wants, or he can start blowing up foundations that actually matter. Both of those things are fine by me, and it makes his decision on what to destroy for your R a lot more difficult. So naturally, the one card that has both the throw and the reversal keyword, Spider Suplex, really solid attack in Shadow Man. Very versatile play. It's got a really great block on it. You're looking at a 6 vitality swing, even if they block it, between the gaining the 3 life and the natural 6 damage on it. You can hit far more than 3 damage on that attack easily. It's a card that demands answers in this deck, and your opponent might not necessarily be able to keep his correct answers for it on the board. So it's a very dangerous card. I supplemented that with 3 copies of Moontracer and 1 copy of Izuna Drop. Izuna Drop is actually... I would probably play a second Izuna Drop if I owned one, but I don't. It's a great 6 damage throw. It's got flash randomly. I don't know if I would play more than 2 of it to begin with. I'm not playing this to try and trigger Shadow Man's R to get it into my momentum right away. I just like it because it's a throw with great numbers. Not having a block isn't really that harsh when it's your only attack that doesn't have a block. Moontracer is also good. Moontracer only deals 4 damage, but Spider Suplex and Moontracer are both mid throws. So being mid throws, you can't prepare to fight, block them, and just take no damage. You need to have a different answer. So that increases the value of those cards quite a bit, I think, in this meta. Skull Barrier is a reversal that you can play after you block with it, which I think has a lot of value. I waffled back and forth between playing Skull Barrier and playing Spraygio, and I found Skull Barrier where I was generating so much momentum with this deck. Skull Barrier was just superior for what I was using it for. I didn't care about the 2 cards I drew most of the time with Spraygio. Skull Barrier was very live and very difficult to deal with. 2 copies of Hienshi Bukyaku, Robert's Junior Kick, dynamic entry we call it in Calgary. Really strong reversal attack, draws you a card, gives your next block breaker 1. It's 4 damage reversal, got a high block. It's got great numbers on it, honestly. Pretty playable on offense too. But it's just a really, like, it's never gonna win you the game, but it's always relevant. And I love that about the card. Even without playing a bunch of the kick synergy that Death has access to, it doesn't need it. It's just a fine card on its own. It certainly carries its weight at 2 copies. And then 2 copies of Hyperbomb. Hyperbomb in this deck is really good if you're playing against an opponent that has more vitality than you. I only play it at 2 because if you're playing it into a 7-hand size, its only function in that kind of matchup is going to be as an opener to soften them up a bit before you start hammering into them with your cowboy batteries and your spider suplexes. So it loses. I feel like it doesn't have nearly as much value in the 7-hand size matchup, and especially in Calgary local meta where 7-hand size is very common to play. I feel like it doesn't have nearly as much value as when you are a 7-hand size playing Hyperbomb. So I would only run that into this deck and I don't see that changing in any way except unless I decide to go to 1 or even 0. But 2 feels fine. Like 2's generally pretty relevant across a lot of matchups. Assets. 2 copies of Pull My Trigger because card is disgusting on reversals. Yeah, I mean, it's where we ended up with designing it. And then card I was hype about this deck was that 3 copies of Fortress of Bones, Skullman's Terrain. That card has been really not live for the 2 years it's been out, and it is extremely live in this deck. Being able to generate momentum on both players' turns for free just by hitting them with your throws, hitting reversals. It puts a lot more pressure on an opponent to block attacks correctly and to hate out your throws, and it punishes them very heavily if they don't. So it is a fantastic card. You can commit, if you're attacking, you can commit it. It counts as 2 foundations. It's got a +1 high block on it. It's got a 5 check. It's got fantastic numbers on it all around. Probably the MVP card of this deck, in all honesty. Very unexpectedly strong card in this deck. Very happy with it. I started at 1 and it crawled its way up to 3, and I want to see it every game. It's so good. Then the rest of the foundation base, most of it's pretty standard. You've got the reactive style Balance Fighter designed for combat setup from the Skullman support. Those cards are really strong in any death deck. They're very versatile. They answer a lot of things. They're very useful in general. 4 copies of Power Struggles because throws are a thing, and I like breakers blocking throws. It's also kind of a mini design for combat. You can just still form, destroy it, discard a card, draw a card. Basically gives me 8 copies of design for combat. They both have +2 mid block. Very solid numbers on these cards. It's very, like, you can't ask for much more out of a 1-drop. Then to supplement the design for combat Power Struggles, 4 copies of Pull to Magigen and 1 copy of Focused Impatient. Focused Impatient's a great card to have at 1 in any deck that can play it. Gives you a lot of top deck control if you're on the back foot. And especially if you have top deck control already, it lets you really gain a lot of information you wouldn't have otherwise. And then Pull to Magigen, on top of being really good for the top deck control, is going to be very live when you're in desperation. When you have all this pressure on your opponent's staging area, it's very difficult to swing into you until before the in against this deck. You want to be a late game deck that can all in it to really belittle its pressure, because poking it is dangerous. Poking it can cause you foundations. It can cause you to take a lot of damage, and it's just very punishing to poke it in general. Pull to Magigen kind of really leverages that advantage, where if you're poking it and you poke him into desperation, you're gonna have a hard time passing the last attack you need to kill him. Around the just the control out of Skull Barrier, the foundation control, the life gain off Spider Suplex, the card draw to draw into more blocks. It's a really solid last line of defense card. That really gave the deck, that was an addition I gave to the deck this week, and it really gave it the last kick on defense that it really needed. And then the foundations that I found specifically were good with Shadow Man. I was really impressed by My Beautiful Face is Ruined, our trigger to destroy foundation after you block with it. And if you're in desperation, it gives you damage pump and damage reduction. It makes you a lot harder to kill. Because of the pressure it has on your opponent's staging area, it just compounds the problem. More foundation control, more desperation effects. You're very difficult to kill before you hit desperation. You're very difficult to kill from before you hit desperation to dead. You have a very decent window to survive almost anything. A cowboy battery can't kill you before you hit desperation, and that's really the one thing you need to worry about the most. Is just, can you deal with the 12 damage before it hit, before you die. That's a problem that 7 hand size death can struggle with sometimes, where if you're gonna hit desperation at 9, you're already staring down a cowboy battery. And if the first copy takes you to 6, you have to deal with the second copy before you can use your Pull to Magigens, and that can be all the difference, really. 2 copies of Towering Over Rivals. That's E-Destroy. Both players destroy one of their opponent's committed foundations. That's got really good synergy with Fortress of Bones, where you can commit that to pass your first attack if you have to, if you get a bad check. And if your opponent's got committed foundations, you just blow them up with Towering Over Rivals. It's very much a Salt the Earth kind of foundation, where it's just you want to take down their staging area as much as possible, and that's a really good card to do it with. It's very cost efficient. It's got a low block on it too, something that Death before Cowboy Battery came out really struggled with, was blocking low. And so now it's got more than enough block coverage on low to between Cowboy Battery, Spiders and Dragons, prepare to fight. You can block low all day. That's a very misunderstood weakness of Death right now. That a lot of people try to hit it low because they don't think you can block low, and you can very certainly block low right now with Death. You have, and then one copy of Rook Takes Pawn. Very good for blowing up face down foundations. Very good for punishing your opponent for playing flip effects. Great synergy with Spiders and Dragons. Also blows up unique foundations if you're behind. Shouldn't necessarily be behind with this deck, but if you're playing against a 7-hand size wall deck, sure, it might come in. One copy of Black Justice. Doesn't play any powerful effects. It's mostly there to review it. It's also got a low block on it, so it's very just more resiliency against low zone. It makes your opponent destroy a ready foundation and review it, so it's very strong in that regard for the backswing. And one copy of Active Treason. You play enough reversal attacks that you should be able to use Active Treason to target remove something that you don't really want to deal with. And then finally 4 copies of Cunning and Prideful. So that Cunning and Prideful is in the deck, so because of all of your throw attacks, you're usually going to have throw attacks in your momentum, maybe reversal attacks in your momentum, whatever. So if you're going to multiple out your Cowboy Battery, that's going to let you pick up your multiple copy and throw that at them too. It's going to give you more value out of playing Cowboy Battery, but it also serves as your counter to Cowboy Battery if you don't see your prepare to fights, if you don't have enough momentum control off reactive style. Cunning and Prideful is going to let you pick up the face down card Cowboy Battery drops in your card pool, and that's gonna give you it's gonna make it a lot easier to deal with Cowboy Battery, which is probably one of the most important cards to be able to deal with right now. It's a card that's very easy to kill people with, and Death is a very commonly played symbol. So being able to leverage advantage out of Cunning and Prideful, I think, is very important on all 3 of those symbols, because it's going to give you just another tool to fight Cowboy Battery on top of being a generally useful card if you can make use of its effect. And so all told, I've been very happy with playing this deck. I've been playing this deck for probably 3 weeks now. It's certainly my favorite deck I have together in my deck box. I love blowing up foundations, and I don't feel like this deck needs flash attacks in the slightest. I really don't care for flash attacks for the most part, and I was very delighted to find that this deck starting kind of as a troll really worked out properly, and it turned into, as far as a deck that can generate tempo advantage over your opponent, I couldn't ask for more than this deck gave me. I've taken games from being down by 5 or more foundations to being ahead, just by hitting momentum spikes and being able to punish my opponent for trying to kill me, in its own really sort of I guess dirty way, really. I think probably the most important thing is that I specifically designed this deck to not use any Ruler of Time cards. I could have played Hizoku Prince Self-Destruct in this pretty easily and probably leveraged a lot of advantage out of that. I really wanted to play, there's an Elizabeth Foundation called Protector of the Innocent, which is a good way to generate extra momentum on block, so you don't have to take damage to use your reactive styles, but the deck doesn't really need that all that much anyways. And it doesn't really, the only decent death cards out of Ruler of Time anyways out of Team Elizabeth stuff. It is going to take a bit of a hit when Neomax rotates, and you're going to lose Hyunshibu Kyaku, which is it doesn't seem like a big loss, but it's going to mean that the deck is going to have to find a replacement for that high block reversal slot that it might struggle with, and it's very likely going to have to be replaced with a non-block reversal. Probably, I'd say very likely to be Neurofatisa, or I toyed with the idea of playing Skullbuster in this deck with all the Skullman support. It seemed like it wouldn't be a terrible idea. I really wanted to play it at 1, but Izuna Drop just fit the slot better. But I could see that coming into the deck at 1. Possibly Matador turn. Possibly... I can't really think of anything else that I would want to put in that slot. But that's also 2 sets away, so who knows what kind of tools Death is going to get in that time frame anyways. And it can just keep on trucking right through. So I'm very excited to be able to develop this deck as new sets come out. As far as I'm concerned, this deck can only get better over the next year. Yeah, who knows? Maybe this is the competitive turn for the deck. If you like it, put it together and try it, and be my guest. It's a lot of fun to play, especially if you love the Foundation Destruction strategy. So yeah, this is my take on Shadow Man. So thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully I can get. I'd really like to make some more builds of this guy. I would love to get an air build out on video as well. But yeah, in the meantime, this is my Death Shadow Man. So have a good night.